Happy Hauntings Horror Fans, and welcome to this week's episode of Megan's Murder Movies. I'm your host, Megan, and this week we are getting into my favorite horror movie of all time, The Strangers. I know that I said Scream is my favorite, and it is. Scream is my favorite movie of all time because it always puts me in a good mood, and that is how I classify it being my favorite movie. But The Strangers is my favorite horror movie of all time, and we will get into exactly why as we jump into the episode. This movie is creepy, it's intense, it has an amazing ending. They did some amazing visual work with this episode to actually try to make the audience feel nauseous, which I think is really interesting. It's a total cult classic by now. I absolutely love it. And I waited pretty much until I saw the first one for the sequel to come out, and it took far too long for the sequel to come out. I love the sequel. It's definitely higher budget. You can feel that the first one is low budget, or lower budget, not low budget. It's lower budget, which I think made them make some different choices and some more artistic choices to kind of get the effects that they were wanting, because they didn't have all of the flashy stuff that they did in the second one. But I love the first one so much. There's still parts of it that gives me chills. I love the creepy song that they play in it over and over, and I'm just really excited to chat about this one. I purposely saved this one for my birthday weekend because I wanted to just like hype it up right around my birthday because it's my favorite. So without further ado, let's get into a summary of the film. So a couple goes to a remote vacation home after attending a friend's wedding. What should be a lovely weekend away turns horrific as the couple is harassed by 3 masked intruders. So The Strangers was written and directed by Brian Bertino. He is an American film director, producer, and screenwriter, best known as the writer and director, of course, of The Strangers. And he also wrote the sequel, The Strangers Pray at Night, which came out 10 years later. I waited for that. I just realized I waited for that sequel for 10 years. That seems like such a long time. Brian has also written The Mockingbird, which he directed as well. He wrote and directed The Monster. He also wrote and directed The Dark and Wicked. And then he produced The Black Coat's Daughter, which is a really good film that I'd love to talk about. Stephanie and He's Out There. Lots of horror stuff, and really like what he did with this one as the director. And I really wish that he would have directed The Strangers Pray at Night, but that's okay. Next, we'll move on to, let's talk about the music. So the music was done the score was done by Tom and Andy. It's a musical duo out of New York consisting of Thomas Hadju and Andy Mulburn. They're best known for their work scoring films, and they've also done a lot of music and television as well, and just a ton of stuff. And so there's this really cool song that they play. Let me find it. It is called Mama Tried, which is played several times throughout the film. It's super creepy. I really love it. And it's from 1968, and it's actually by this band called Merle Haggard and the Strangers, which is really cool. Let me see if I can get a clip and play just a second of it, just to get like the creep factor. Please hold.
First thing I remember knowing.
So that's kind of the vibe for the song. And while it doesn't sound creepy, at the points where they play this in the film, it's just, oh, yeah, there's a couple of spots where it's a whole nope. And there's so many good camera angles in this, and I just love it so much. So I wanted to talk about the score. There's some other really good songs. I'll post like a link to the score if I can, because it's pretty good. A 10 out of 10 for the creep effect. All right, now let's get into the rest of the cast. So we have Liv Tyler as Kristen McKee. She's an American actress, producer, singer, and former model. She's best known for her portrayal of Arwen in the Lord of the Rings trilogy. She began modeling at 14, and then she decided to focus on acting later in her career, and she made her film debut in Silent Fall. And she also received starring roles in Heavy and Empire Records, as well as That Thing You Do, Stealing Beauty. Then she appeared in Inventing the Abbotts, Armageddon, Cookie's Fortune, Dr. T and the Woman, One Night at McCool's, Jersey Girl, Lonesome Jim, Reign Over Me, The Strangers, The Incredible Hulk, Super, Space Station 76, Wildling, Ad Astra, tons of stuff. She was also in the HBO series The Leftovers, which was really good, featured Jasmine Brown, love her. And lately she has been in the series 911 Lone Star on Fox. So you've probably seen her in stuff, super popular. She's also, I think, like a Givenchy perfume spokes gal. She does a lot of, like, I think it's Givenchy stuff. And so next we'll go to Scott Speedman. He plays James Hoyt, and Scott is a British-Canadian actor best known for the television drama Felicity. He was also in the Underworld films and played Baz in Animal Kingdom, which is such a great TV show. And some of his other film work include Duets, Dark Blue, Triple X State of the Union, Barney's Version, The Vow, and then he is also Dr. Nick Marsh in Grey's Anatomy, if you're a Grey's Anatomy fan. Next we have Gemma Ward, who plays the doll face. We never actually really see her face in this. She's one of the masked intruders. And Gemma is an Australian supermodel and actress, born in Australia, of course, and was scouted at the age of 14, and then was in Australian Fashion Week at the age of 15. She became the youngest model to appear on the cover of the American edition of Vogue, and was also on Teen Vogue and Time. Vogue Paris would later declare her as one of the top 30 models in the 2000s. And she's widely considered to be a supermodel, but she kind of did some acting in 2008 in The Black Balloon, and then she was also, of course, in The Strangers in 2008 and Pirates of the Caribbean on Stranger Tides in 2011. Next, we'll go to Kip Weeks, and he is the man in the mask, another one of the intruders who we really don't get to see his face. And he has been in a lot of short films. So he was in like Masterpiece, Hearts Ajar, Jubilee Jones, 14 Minutes. He was in On a Country Road, which is a short, and then he had a little series regular on the show Ragged Isle. He was also in the movie that came out, I think it was on Netflix in 2020, called Spencer Confidential. He's also been in Seeds, and he's got a couple things in the works, it looks like right now, based on his online presence. And next we will go to Laura Margulis, and she is the pinup girl, which also we do not see her face because she's one of the masked intruders. And so she's an American actress that has performed in a ton of guest roles on television series like The Drew Carey Show, Friends, Line of Fire, Monk, and Mistresses, and then also done a couple of film things, The Strangers being one of them, and then a couple of smaller parts and other stuff. And then finally, we move on to Glenn Howerton, who plays Mike, which is a friend of James. And Glenn is an American actor, producer, screenwriter, and director. He's best known for his role as Dennis Reynolds in It's Always Funny in Philadelphia, which he's also a writer and executive producer for. And then he was Jack Griffin in AP Bio, as well as the lead role in the short-lived sitcom That 80s Show, not to be confused with That 70s Show. And yeah, so that is the cast. Now that we know a little bit about the cast, we can get into some fun facts about the film. And so the screenplay itself, I think on like the title screen, it says inspired by a true story. And so it's kind of inspired by two real life events, the multiple homicides of the Manson, Tate, LaBianca murders, and then also a series of break-ins that occurred in the director's neighborhood as a child. So I won't get super into the Manson family murders just because this isn't a true crime podcast, but I do know a lot about those. So if you're not a huge true crime person, Charles Manson, basically a cult leader, and wanted to start a race war because he thought that the Beatles were the four horsemen of the apocalypse and thought that they were trying to communicate with him through the White Album. It's a whole weird thing. He wanted to be a musician, probably took one too many drugs, and convinced his followers to kill Sharon Tate, who was a pretty big actress at the time. She was pregnant, and her friends that were over at her house that evening. They went, murdered everyone, absolutely awful, and then they also did the same at the LaBianca house, murdered Mr. LaBianca and his wife, in hopes that they would incite that like race war that Charles thought would bring his rule into light or something. Yeah, it was basically like he wanted power and thought that if he had, you know, the blacks and the whites fighting against each other, that he could convince all of the black people that he should lead them, I guess. Again, lots of drugs. The 60s and 70s were wild times, that's for sure. But in terms of the director's experience, he said that when he was a kid, the house that they lived in was on a street in the middle of nowhere, and one night while his parents were out, someone knocked on the front door, and him and his little sister answered it. At the door were some people asking for somebody that didn't live there, and they later found out that these people were knocking on doors in the area, basically to see if anyone was home, and then they'd break into the house, rob the house, and that's basically how they were picking and choosing which houses they were going to break into just to see if people were home. So you'll see kind of that in the film play out when the first girl goes up and asks if Tamara is home, and Liv Tyler's character is like, no, sorry, like nobody lives here full time. Like this is just a vacation home. But yeah, so that's kind of what it means when it says inspired by true events. Those are the two events that kind of came into Brian's head when he started this movie. So before filming any of the scenes where the couple was being terrorized by the strangers, Liv Tyler, I guess, would run laps and do jumping jacks and other physical activities to kind of get that panicky, out-of-breath feeling that her character would be kind of experiencing to seem authentic, which I think is kind of a cool way to do a little bit of method acting without going super crazy, hardcore, cough, Jared Leto, not needing to do anything super wild, but just go that little extra bit to make the acting, I guess, a little bit easier, because I imagine it's probably hard to act out of breath if you're not. So a couple jumping jacks, get your heart rate up a little bit, seem a little hyper, probably is an easy way to get that feeling. And like I was talking about in the beginning, if you've seen this movie and felt uneasy or gotten a little motion sickness, that's not on accident. The film was shot entirely with handheld or steady cams, so every single shot intentionally has some form of camera movement. And you can, if you watch the movie with that in mind, you can definitely see where it's really kind of shaky at times. And it's not all the time, it's ever so slightly in moments. But yeah, the camera's always slightly moving, and so it feels not as intense as like Blair Witch, or I'm trying to think of another one, Cloverfield, where it's, you know, someone recording themselves, and so the camera's all over the place, but it definitely feels kind of shaky and a little uncomfortable. And then the last fun fact that I have is that the script was originally called The Faces, which I think would have been cool, but I think The Strangers definitely is a bit spookier, because there's, you know, there's that whole thing that you're taught growing up as a kid is don't talk to strangers. You know, it's always that trope in like true crime things where 9 times out of 10 it's not true, but they think that, you know, oh, it's the random stranger comes into the small town and murders people and then like leaves. It's the guy that nobody knows. It's the person that doesn't belong. Even though history has shown that 9 times out of 10, if you're going to get murdered, it's going to be by somebody that you know and not some random stranger, statistically speaking. But still scary nonetheless, because the idea, which we'll get to at the end, and I don't want to spoil right now, but we'll get to the idea of like the stranger's whole motive behind why they're doing what they're doing. And it's so chilling and eerie, and probably one of my favorite lines in every horror film. Yeah, even beats out some of the Stu Macher lines that I love so much. But yeah, so super exciting. I'm really excited to get into this one. But now that we've met the cast and we have some fun facts, let's get into the scene-by-scene breakdown. So we open with a black screen and some writing that says inspired by true events. And then we see that February 11th, 2005, James and Kristen were visiting a family summer home after a wedding and were attacked by masked intruders, and that the events of this attack are not entirely known by the police. And then the screen goes blank again, and we hear a car starting, and we see houses kind of like you're driving by in the daytime. And then we hear a 911 call, and it sounds like a child on the phone. They say that they found bodies in the house. The screen is blank at this point, and then we see these two boys pull up to the house. They've got bikes. There's a car sitting in the driveway. The windows have been smashed, and the front door is wide open. And they found people. And then we see stuff throughout the house. So there's like a ring box and flower petals on the table. And then there's a ring box and flower petals on the floor. There's a gun on the kitchen counter. There's a bloody knife on the floor as well. And then there's also this giant blood stain on the wall. It sounds like these kids found these bodies. They're on the phone with the police, and that's kind of all we get. The next thing we see is this couple in a car, and this, of course, is our main characters, James and Kristen. They're driving. James is driving, actually. She's sitting in the passenger seat. Looks like she's crying. Very awkward silence going on between the two of them. They're stuck at a red light. It's really cool because, of course, it's just red light on their faces, and then we see the light go to green, but we see it because the light on their faces goes to green. Kind of a cool little shot. It's dark, it's late, there's nobody else on the road. They pull up to this mailbox. The guy, James, gets out of the car, kind of slams the door, gets the mail, and then they go up to the house. At this point, Kristen has started smoking a cigarette in the car, and she's kind of waiting outside the house, finishing up her cigarette before she comes in. Still, neither of them are talking with one another. She slowly comes in and puts out her cigarette and then officially comes inside. And the lights are off in the house at this point. You can just see kind of shapes, and you can see James moving about. You can see Kristen come in. And then the next thing we see is a record player, and the lights are on in the house, and there's rose petals all over the place. There's champagne, and it definitely feels like there's supposed to be a celebration going on, but that's clearly not happening. James says that it's fine, they'll just sleep in separate rooms, and they're looking at this bathtub that's full of roses. And he's basically like, yeah, I really wasn't sure if the roses were supposed to go in first and then the water, or kind of how that goes. And Kristen goes, yeah, I really don't know either. And he takes the bottle of champagne, and then he helps her get out of her wedding dress. She's not in a wedding dress, she's in a dress that you would wear to a wedding, like a wedding guest dress, almost like a bridesmaid's dress. And so I'm not sure if she was a bridesmaid or if this was just the dress that she wore. She looks very nice, and so he helps her unzip the dress. She gets in the bath, and he goes outside to call his friend, and he leaves a message for his friend Mike and says, hey, I know it's late, but when you wake up, I know that you're probably drunk, but can you please come get me? I just really don't want to be here right now. This is terrible, and I don't like it. And so you can kind of tell it's pretty easy before they even explain it that James proposed to Kristen, and she said no. And they were supposed to go have this lovely weekend together at his parents' summer cabin, whatever this is supposed to be, summer home. And he set it all up, but that's clearly not happening because she declined. So there's more awkward silence, and we get flashbacks to the wedding that they were at. And he gets her from the table, and they go outside, and things are really good at this moment. This is clearly before he pops the question. He carries her out to the car, and then he puts her down right outside the car, and she's like, come on, it's cold, let's get inside. And he's like, no, hold on, I want to tell you something. And that's when he pulls out this blue ring box, and he just says that it feels right. And she looks petrified by seeing this ring box. And then flash back to the cabin or the house, whatever you want to call it, and she's sitting in the tub, and he's sitting down at the table digging into a giant tub of ice cream, which I feel is pretty valid. How else do you mend a broken heart but with ice cream? She comes out of the bathroom, and she's still in her dress. She puts her dress back on after getting in the bath, and she sits at the table with him. And she says it's really nice, kind of everything that he did and everything that he put together, and that she appreciates it. And he asks her to keep the ring. He's like, I don't want this. I'm not going to keep it. Please just take it. I don't want to look at it. And he pops the champagne and starts drinking it. They share the champagne straight from the bottle, and he kind of asks her why she put the dress back on instead of her other clothes, because they had weekend bags and stuff. And she apologizes for kind of the night not going how he wanted, and she just says that she isn't ready yet. He gets up, And she like grabs his hand because she wants to talk with him, but he kind of pulls away and he puts on a record, and she goes and like gives him a hug from behind. So clearly she wants to be in a relationship. She's just maybe not ready for that next step. And he feels rejected, which is totally valid. Like, I can't even imagine what this whole situation must feel like. When it's like, okay, but you don't want to marry me now, so like, will you ever want to marry me? And it's just, ugh, it's awkward. And so he turns around and they hug and they're like having this very intimate moment, definitely getting ready to like have sex. He kind of like puts her up on the table and you see him like take her panties off, whatever. And then there's this very loud knock at the door and they both look at the clock and it's very late. Like, I think after midnight. I couldn't quite tell, and I honestly wasn't going to pause the movie and rewind it to figure out, but definitely very late. Not a time where you really get visitors, especially out in the middle of nowhere, which they kind of are. And it's really loud knocking. It's not just like a light tap. It's like a pounding knocking, which seems a bit intense, especially for this late. And it's this girl on the front porch, and she goes, "Is Tamara here?" And he's like, "Oh, no one by that name lives here. Like, you have the wrong house." And that's clearly obvious because that's just like a summer home that his family uses. It's not, people don't live there full time. And she says, "Oh, okay, see you later." And then she just leaves, which makes absolutely no sense because it's like, why would you say see you later? Like, maybe you just got flummoxed. Like when you're at the movies and they're like, "Oh, enjoyed the film." And you're like, "Oh, yeah, you too." And then you're like, "Oh, awkward." Like maybe that's what it was, but it still was odd. And the front porch light was out. And like when he opened the door, like you couldn't really see this girl's face because the porch light was out, but you could tell when they got to the house that the porch light was on because, like I said, it was dark inside the house, and so the only light that we could see was from the porch light. So it doesn't add up. And so he like realizes that the porch light is out, and he like reaches back up, and the light bulb had been unscrewed. Awkward. And so then now it's like really awkward again between James and Kristen. She's sitting at the table, he's sitting on the couch, and she's saying that she's getting ready to run out of cigarettes. And he's like, "Oh, it's okay, like I'll go get some." And she's like, "No, that's fine. Like that's not what I was asking. I was just like making a comment." I think she was just trying to fill the empty, awkward silence in the room by saying that. And he's like, "No, it's fine. I can go do that. Like, let me start a fire so you can warm up, and then I'll head into town." So I'm guessing there's like a smaller town nearby. Also, like, what store is going to be open in that town though at midnight? And they're definitely like. And then James says that they should probably postpone their road trip. It sounds like they had this whole plan to go on this long road trip after this wedding. But he's like, "I don't really think that that's a good idea right now." And she's like, "Oh, okay, like that's fine, whatever you want to do. Like if that's what'll make you feel better, then that's okay, I guess." And I think that that's fair. I think that maybe going on a very possibly romantic type trip where just the two of them probably isn't going to feel super great right now after everything that transpired kind of at the wedding and stuff. And so he goes off to the store and she puts on some music and ends up putting the ring on. She's playing with the piano a little bit and just is kind of trying to relax in the house. And then we hear another knock at the door. And it's this really great moment because she's kind of like chilling in the house. And as we hear this knock, the song says, "Should we go outside? Should we go outside?" And it feels very eerie and it's like perfectly done. And I love that. So good. The music in this is just top notch. And these are like single knocks. Like I feel like when most people knock, it's like threes, you know what I mean? And this is like there's one knock, and then there's a wait, and then there's another knock, and then another one. It's like very weird. It's not like a pattern. It's funky. I don't like it. Something's wrong. So Kristen goes up to the door, but she doesn't open it. She just kind of says hello from the other, like, hello. And it's the same girl. And she says, "Hi, is Tamara home?" And Kristen goes, "You already came by here. Like, you know that there's no one named Tamara." And the girl says, "Are you sure?" And Kristen doesn't say anything. And then you hear the girl leave. And you're like, what is happening? So now the music has stopped and the fire is smoking up the house because they didn't do the little like chimney thingy for the smoke to go up. It was shut, so all the smoke was coming into the house. So the smoke detector starts going off, and we get another knock at the door. This time really intense, though. This time, like, big pounding at the door. She gets her phone and it's almost dead, and so she uses the landline to call James, and she tells him that the girl came back and she just keeps knocking, and she's like, I don't know what she wants. She changes into jeans and a tank top and a flannel. She lights a cigarette, and we see someone standing in a mask in the back hallway. And this mask is like one of the creepiest horror movie masks, I think, in my opinion, because it just looks like this sack. Like, it looks like an old school like potato sack or like flour sack that doesn't have anything written on it, and it just has like eye holes cut out. It's so creepy. So that's potato sack guy. That's what we're gonna call him. That's what I've always called him. He is potato sack guy, and so that is what we will be calling him in this podcast. It's such a great scene because she's standing like in the kitchen area, because now the knocking has stopped. She was on the phone with James. The call kind of got dropped because she was like, can you please stay on the phone with me? And so she's just kind of standing in the house, unsure of what to do now, because now it's all quiet and she's by herself. And we see Potato Sack Guy standing like in the back hallway, and she's in the foreground. She goes to the kitchen. She's going to get some water. We still keep seeing this man just watching her. And then it cuts up close to her getting water, and then we pan back out, and the guy is gone. It's such a great scene. It's so good. So then she hears something kind of in that back hallway area, and so of course gets a little spooked, gets a knife, and goes over to like where that area was, and like gets the landline again, tries to call James, but of course that's not working because the call got dropped. I'm sure they probably cut the phone lines or something. She walks over to that area and hears another bang on the door, and then she realizes that the fire alarm is now on the chair when she had left it on the floor. So she goes directly to her phone because she had plugged it in, so it should be charged now, but her phone is gone. And someone is trying to get in the front door. Like, you can hear the doorknob like moving, like someone's trying to turn it. She also hears someone at the back sliding glass door, and it's like this like scraping sound on the back, like by the sliding glass door area. And she opens the curtains to see Potato Sack Man on the other side of the door. It's this great scream. It's this great, like, you see him in the background, but to see him up close and personal like that, chef's kiss. So good. So fucking spooky. So she, of course, screams, backs up, knocks into the record player, and it starts skipping at whatever song it's playing. So it's very eerie, makes your skin crawl. It's not good. And we hear the front door open. And she peeks out and sees another person in a mask. She runs and she's hearing noises all around her. She's like now in this bedroom, and she can hear like people at the front door, people at the back door, and someone at like the window in the bedroom that she's in, like pounding on the window. They're trying to get in from basically every spot that they can. And she's trying to turn off this lamp that's in the bedroom that she's in, and it's not turning off, so she ends up just breaking the lamp, cuts her hand. Definitely not good. And then you hear the record stop. It shuts off, and then there's complete silence, and then you hear footsteps coming down the hallway. But thankfully it's just James, but also there's people outside. So Kristen goes up to him and just starts like rambling. She's like, we need to get out of here, like blah, 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 blah. People were trying to get in. That girl came back, all this stuff. And he's like, whoa, what's going on? Like, what happened? He sees that she's cut her hand. He's like, what happened? Like, what did you do? And he's asking questions, but she's freaking out, which is valid. And so he goes to investigate. He takes the knife from her. They check out the house. No one's there. However, you can see her phone sitting in the fire, and you're like, well, that's definitely not where she put it. And Kristen can see the girl standing in the yard, the first girl that came to the door. You can tell because she's got this like long, blonde, kind of wavy hair. And so it's that same girl. She's standing in the yard, and James is like, shit, I left my phone in the car. Like, I need to go get it. And then when they look back out the window, the girl is gone. James goes out to the car, and the front windshield is smashed, and his phone is gone. And someone also touches the back of his neck, but no one's there. And it's not just one of those, like, he turns around, like he hears something. Like, you see a hand in the car, like, just gently brush the back of his neck, and he turns around, and then you hear running, and nobody's there. And it's, oh my gosh, this movie's so creepy, and it's so well done, and I just love it so much. It's one of my favorite, like, people who say they love horror movies, and then I'm like, have you seen this one? Because if you haven't, you need to, because it's my absolute favorite. It's so scary. Now the girl is standing, the like one with the blonde hair, is standing in the driveway. He tells her to leave. Kristen pops her head out and he's like, you need to go back inside. And she's like, no, what's going on? And he can hear people running in the woods by the house. Like, you hear footsteps, you hear rustling, you hear, like, it's not necessarily giggling, but it definitely sounds like whispers, like definitely spooky. Unsettling, we'll say that. He's walking down the driveway and doesn't see anyone else, so then he kind of backtracks and goes back to the house. And he's like, get your stuff, we're leaving, like, we're getting in the car, we're getting the fuck out of here. He takes off his tie that he had worn to the wedding and puts it on Kristen's hand where she was cut and explains that we're alone out here. He's like, when I went to the store, I didn't see anybody. There's no one around. Like, the closest house is miles from here. We just need to get in the car and leave. He's trying to stay strong and keep her calm, and he's doing an okay job, I think, and she's, like, kind of settling a bit until he sees his phone on the piano, which is, like, in kind of the main living room area, and there's no battery. And so that means they were in the house again. And so they run out to the car, they're backing up out of the driveway, and a truck pulls up and blocks them in. And now it's this woman in a mask, and she's got black hair. But again, we only see this mask. And I would say that this mask looks kind of like a doll face, I'm trying to think of what the best, like a porcelain doll face, I would say. Super creepy. And so she's driving this truck. And then we see Potato Sack Man in front of their car. And so they're kind of blocked at all angles, and the truck revs up and just slams into the back of their car. And so they have no other option but to get out and run back in the house. They lock the door, and James starts looking for a gun. He's like, my dad used to have one, but he always hid it, so I'm not sure where it is. He's able to find it, and they end up going to the bedroom to look for bullets. And as soon as they go in the bedroom, they see on the window above the bed is lipstick that just says hello, written over and over and over again in red lipstick that belongs to Kristen. They start looking for bullets in the closet. They find some, but James admits that he really doesn't know how to use it. He's like, I don't even know how to load it. Like, I don't know what I'm doing with this. Then the strangers start trying to break into the house using an axe to break the front door. It kind of reminds me of The Shining, like when Jack Nicholson is using the axe or the hatchet, whatever you want to call it, to break the like door in the bathroom to get to Shelley Duvall, who's on the inside. That's what it reminds me of. They put the piano in the way to block it, and he shoots the gun at the like front door, and whoever was up at the front with the axe goes away. They hide in what looks like a bedroom, and James has the gun fixed on the doorway to the room. Like, anyone gets in that door frame, and he is firing, basically. And you hear someone in the house. The record player starts with that song I was talking about, Mama Tried. And then we see a car pulling up outside, and it's James's friend Mike that came to get him, that James called and said, hey, like, can you please come pick me up? So Mike's leaving him a message. He's like, hey dude, like, I don't know if you're asleep, but I'm at the house. Like, I felt okay, so I just figured I'd come now. Like, I'm sorry all that happened. I just want to be here for you. And as he's leaving him a message, they break Mike's car windshield. And so he gets out of the car, of course, shocked and confused. And he goes up to the house and he sees their car all beat to shit. He should have just called the police then, but he didn't. And you can tell that the strangers are watching him. Like, you can feel that they're just watching him. He goes in the house via the back door, and he sees the mess and hears the music playing. And the music's loud. Like, it's not like playing softly. It's playing very loud. He goes down the hallway, and we see the Potato Sack Man walking behind him with this giant axe. So as James is going down the hallway, the music stops. So I think the record player, like, got to the end of its song and stops. And Mike takes the step and gets in that door frame, and James shoots him, thinking that it's the intruders. It's a really good shot by James, but it's also so tragic because you're like, that could have been your way out. But you also know that, like, Potato Sack Man probably would have killed him, like, before that, you know, like he was following him down the hallway with the axe. Like, he wouldn't have let them get away, but it's so heartbreaking. And so James crawls to the door because he's like, the guy didn't have a mask. Like, he didn't have a mask on. And so he crawls and he sees that it's his friend. And he starts crying, and then Kristen starts crying. I can't even imagine being like, yeah, like, we fucking got one. And then it's your friend who came to help you out. Like, oh my God, no thank you. Awful. Kristen's trying to console James, but he's losing it, which is totally fair. Like, he just shot one of his best friends in the face. They leave that room, and he reloads the gun, and he says that there's an old radio in the barn, and he's going to try and go for it and call for help. He tells her to hide. He's like, stay in the house, hide. Like, he leaves out the back door. And before he does that, on the back door, they had taken the lipstick and they had written killer in lipstick on the back sliding glass door, which is like, you motherfuckers. Like, that's just rude. So Kristen basically panics because she's like, no, I want to go with you. And he's like, no, you need to stay here and hide. And so then she just doesn't really know what to do. She just like stands there. She like goes out on the back porch and she's like, James, and like whispers for him. She doesn't see him. And you're like, you are out in the open right now, ma'am. Like, go get your butt in the house and hide, please. Ma'am, it's ridiculous. So James is kind of running around the property, and we see that Potato Sack Man gets James, or so we think, because they all had flashlights. The strangers all had flashlights looking for him, and then Potato Sack Man kind of sneaks up behind him and gets the jump on him. So next we see Potato Sack Man in the house looking for Kristen, but she's actually sitting on the back porch outside, right under the light, which seems like a dumb move. I'm like, that's a terrible hiding spot, but okay. And she decides to take off toward the barn. She trips in this little like ravine ditch area, messes up her ankle or her leg, I think both, but now can't walk that well. And you hear tons of noise coming from the house. Like, it sounds like Potato Sack Man is just destroying everything. It's scary. It does not sound good. Assuming looking for her. So Kristen's crawling toward the barn, and you see the doll face girl following her. Very much a cat and mouse game with the strangers. Like, you see the doll face following Kristen as she's crawling on the ground toward the barn, and then Kristen kind of feels like she's being followed, so she like turns around really quick, and doll face is gone. And you're like, oh my goodness. Like, it's a lot of tension in this movie, and a lot of like playing the waiting game. It's so good. So Kristen gets to the barn. She finds a flashlight. She's calling for James, like whisper calling. And then she finally finds the radio. She's messing with it. She's trying to get it to work. She hears someone on the other end. And she says, instead of saying the address, which like I get, but at the same time, it's like you start with your address so they can at least try to get there. But she just whispers into the radio, help me. And you hear whoever it is on the other end say, where are you? And then Dollface shows up in the barn and takes the axe to the radio. And that's done. Breaks it. Kristen tries to leave. She still can't walk, so she's crawling. She's laying next to this tree in the yard, and she sees Potato Sack Guy. So she ducks and she's waiting. She's crawling back to the house, and she sees Dollface come out of the barn, and then she sees the other girl with the long blonde hair. We'll call her like child face, because that's kind of what her mask looks like a kid's, like a child, like a young girl's face. It's creepy. I don't like it. They both look like doll faces, but we have to differentiate somehow. So, doll face, child face. Kristen can see from where she's at that their car is now on fire. So, definitely not leaving in the car. Kristen tries to stand up so that she can move a little bit faster. She's able to get inside. She goes toward Mike. She's bumping into everything in the house, though. Like, I don't know why they didn't look for a phone on Mike. Like, I get that you're in a high-pressure situation, but I feel like that would have been my first thought, is like, where is Mike's phone? But it's probably gone now. Like, they lost their chance with that one. So she's bumping into everything and making a ton of noise, and the strangers then cut the power. And there's really great lighting in this scene, because the only light that we see is from the fire, so it's this really pretty, like, red-orange light, and there's not a lot of it. There's really cool shadows, and she hears someone playing the piano, and it's the potato sack man. He's coming in through the front door. So he goes down the hallway, kind of like, so he comes in the house, and Kristen is to his right, standing like by the kitchen, and he goes to his left down one of the hallways. He doesn't really seem to see her though, and so she backs up. She gets into the pantry, and she's looking out, like the pantry door has these like blinds almost, I guess you could say. So the blinds are open, kind of, and so she's peeking out the blinds. We see Potato Sack Man walking around, and then he comes into the kitchen area. He sits at the table for a moment. He gets up, and then he walks away. And so Kristen gets up to the door. She's looking out these blinds, and then Child Face Mask appears right in front of her. She screams really loud. That woman is trying to break the blinds off the door, and then she just like walks away because, again, it's a cat and mouse game. And so she goes to the table, this like child face mask, and she picks up the ring box. At that moment, Kristen kind of comes out of the pantry. That woman grabs a knife, and Kristen is like, "Why are you doing this to us?" And she's just messing with her. She's like walking slowly towards her with the knife, and she's not really like, she totally could have got her in this moment, but she's just not. And next we see James get pushed into the house and fall on the floor. It looks like his hands are possibly tied behind his back. He was captured, but right now is alive. So Kristen tries to run, but she's trapped by these people. Like Potato Sack Man is at the sliding glass door to kind of her right. The child face woman is kind of right in front of her, and then toward the front door to the left is Doll Face. And so the only room that she has to go is kind of back down the hallway behind her into one of the back bedrooms where there's like hello all over the window. So she goes in there, shuts the door, and she's trying to get the window open so that she can get back outside that way, but it will not budge. She hears James screaming, Kristen screams for him, and the lights come back on. She goes toward the door, and then the door to that room opens. So she goes toward that door, I think because she just wants to see James, and it's like, I get that you love him, but cut your losses. Like, I really appreciate my boyfriend, but I should tell him if we are ever in this situation, I am gonna leave you. I love you, but I'm gonna leave you. Those situations, every person for himself. I'm sorry. No, thank you. But she tries to go back for her man, which commendable, but Potato Sack Man ends up jumping out and kind of pushing her up against the wall, knocks her out, and he drags her into the living room. She's kind of halfway conscious, I would say. Like, she's kind of coming in and out. He's dragging her, but then at one point she's like trying to grab the wall so that she can like get away, but it's not working. She screams, and the screen goes black. Next, we see James and Kristen are tied up in chairs next to each other. Now it's morning. We keep seeing the beautiful like sunshine outside. It's definitely kind of fall vibes. There's like nice leaves going on. And Kristen is back in her dress, which is really creepy because she had been in jeans, a tank top, and a flannel. But now she's back in her dress, which just I don't like because that means that she was dressed, like undressed and then redressed while she was unconscious, which is just creepy. And the strangers are all standing in front of them. And Kristen asks again, "Why are you doing this?" And this is when you get the best line because the woman, the blonde-haired girl with the child face mask, says, "Because you were home." And that's just so fucking creepy because it's like there was no real motive. It was just this was convenient. You were home, so why not? And it's like that. It's one of the best lines. It's one of the best motives. This movie is so creepy because, like, how often is everybody home? People are home all the time. That should not be a reason why you get murdered. But with these guys, I guess that's how they do it. So James and Kristen kind of shared this look, I think, kind of in that understanding that, yes, I love you. Yes, we're probably going to die. Yes, I'm glad I'm with you in these final moments, possibly. I don't know, it's a lot for a look, but that's kind of how I see it. The strangers each take their masks off, which is definitely a bad sign for James and Kristen. And we, as the audience, do not get to see their real faces, like full on at all. At moments, we get to see kind of side views or little bits, but we never get to see their real faces, which I think is such a beautiful choice to make. And even makes it even more creepier, because then these people could literally be anyone. I love it. It's so good. Brian did such a great job. And so each of these strangers take turns stabbing the couple, and they start with James. Kristen is begging them to stop, but they just keep stabbing, and we see the outside of the house now, and the audience is just hearing the stabbing and the screaming and the begging happening. Next, we see two boys, maybe 13 years old, with their bikes, and the old Ford truck that was the one that ran into their car pulls up next to the boys. And of course, it's the strangers. And so the blonde-haired girl gets out of the truck, and she goes up to the boys and asks for one of their flyers. And one of the boys says, "Are you a sinner?" And she takes a long pause and says, "Sometimes." And so they hand her one of the flyers. It's for, like, they're church boys, and so it's for their church. And she gets in the car and they drive off. But you hear the other woman tell her, "It'll be easier next time." And so you're like, is this the first time that you guys are doing, like, is this your first house? Or was it just the two of you and now you guys have this third person, this new girl? Like, what's the story here? And we never find that out, which I think is great. So they drive off, and then we kind of see that opening scene again, where these two young boys with their bikes kind of roll up to the house, and they see the car with the smashed in window, and they call 911. And James, now we kind of see where the couple is, though, in the house. They're not tied to the chairs. The kitchen table is flipped over. James is laying on kind of the, I guess, dining area floor, because there's a kitchen, and then there's like the little kitchenette, and then there's where the dining room table is, and then there's the living room. So it all kind of shares one big space because it's an open floor plan. And so he's laying like where the table kind of was, and Kristen is laying by Mike's body. And one of the boys bends down to, like, I don't know, check her pulse or whatever, and she wakes up and screams. So of course we're thinking that maybe Kristen lived through this, but that's how it ends. Just one last jump scare of her coming to and grabbing the boy's arm and screaming. And it's so good, and that's how it ends. And I love this movie so much, and I encourage you, if you're a horror fan and you have not seen it, please go give it a watch. It is one of my favorites. It's so scary and just creepy, and the music is amazing, and the filming is great, and it's got that, like, because the budget for this was lower than, like a regular higher budget film, I think that they did some really cool stuff, and so it's got that really great indie vibe to it, but it's still really creepy. And I honestly, this is a little side note, but I honestly thought that this is how the Slender Man movie was going to be that came out in, it was 2018, and that's how I thought that movie was going to be, and it wasn't, and I'm really sad, and I still want them to do like a cool indie spooky Slender Man instead of the, like, very pop, like, I don't even know what you call it, but the trailers for that looked very indie, and I was really excited, and then I was honestly disappointed. But we can talk about Slender Man another day. I'm sure we will talk about Slender Man a lot, but anyway, that's how I thought it was going to be, and it wasn't. But The Strangers is one of my favorites. I watch it all the time. I make all of my friends who don't mind horror movies watch it if they haven't, and yeah, I think it's super good. I'm planning on getting a tattoo of, like, the strangers, of the masks, which is going to be really cool. And yeah, I hope that you guys enjoyed this episode. And if you did, please give us a like and review, subscribe, whatever it is on Apple would be super great. And if you want to follow us on socials, we are on Twitter and Instagram under M Murder Movies. So that's M as in massacre, Murder Movies on Twitter and Instagram. I hope that you all have a wonderful week or weekend whenever you're listening to this. Tune in next week when we talk about the 2007 film The Mist, which is based on the novella by Stephen King, which is another kind of very intense ending, a little bit gut-wrenching. I don't want to give too much away if you've not seen it, but it's super good and definitely one that sticks in my brain as just completely terribly awful. Super excited to talk about that one next week. So I hope to see you then. Remember to stay safe